Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to do a presentation it's a very difficult presentation. At least it has a lot of grisly material in it. But when I was looking around and I was looking at ransomware and how to relate it as an economic model to other spaces, the kidnapping and ransom market, if you call it that, seemed the most appropriate. Because a lot of times, as an economic business models, there's not that much innovation going on. So a lot of times what I find if we look elsewhere, in the real world, it might teach us a little bit about where an illicit economy or a digital economy is going. So I applied it to ransomware. So to dive right in, when we're used to seeing ransomware or ransom, we're used to seeing this word, and we have, we get, people are held hostage or taken. This crime is as old as time, and we're used to seeing ransom notes like this that we might have saw in the 70s and 80s, where if they didn't want screen analysis going on or handwriting analysis going on, they would use these little paper cutouts and from newspapers and things like that, and we'd do analysis on these and try to figure out who the bad guys were, what their psyche is like, what they're really after, and those sorts of things. So this is just a throwback to old school kidnapping and ransom. When I really first got started in the, really looking at ransomware, this one stat, it's a little dated now, but I like leaving it in because it was at that point in time back in 2014, 2015, where I first started personally seeing these ransomware viruses get out there and impact people in different ways. And I saw some people were paying the ransom, some people weren't, and the problem kept escalating. And then when the new stats came out, I was really blown away. So for instance, just to point this out here, in 2015, all ransoms that were paid, and these are FBI figures, was $24 million. So you get infected with a piece of ransomware, and if you don't have backups or you find that you have to pay, the total payouts that was reported to the FBI, which is a low watermark, was $24 million. So it's, in relative terms, it's kind of a small number. Then the following year, they released this brand new figure. They said it was ballooned to $209 million just for Q1 in 2016. There haven't been any new stats brought by the FBI yet, but right there I was looking at it going, we might be witnessing a brand new cybercrime industry, $1 billion cybercrime industry before our eyes, and we better get on this thing before it's going to cause some real damage. So I moved over from web security to dive into anti-malware because I felt this problem is going to be very real, it's going to be very big, and it's where I want to make an impact. As a little bit of history, what a lot of people aren't aware of is ransomware as a concept is pretty old, actually. The first known case of ransomware, the first example of it in the wild, was from December 11th, 1989, and it quite literally came on a 5 1/4 floppy. There was 20,000 of these floppies made. They were physically mailed to people. It was called the AIDS virus, and if you put this floppy in and you installed it, it would encrypt your data, and you have to send a check to somebody to get the key. This, as a piece of ransomware, it wasn't terribly successful, but it did give us an indication. It is where it all started. I bring up this disk for another reason. I've been trying to locate original copies of these disks, and there was 20,000 originals apparently. And so far in my search over the last couple of years, I've only found one actual original in known existence, and I traced it back to this gentleman here who would not sell it to me. He found it in an old file cabinet on his side because he was actually around back then, and he was actually the recipient of one of these. So what I share with audiences when I do this presentation or anywhere I go, I ask is that if they've seen any disc like this, and they might know who has one, please try to track it down. It's in one, I would like it just as a collector's item, but it's an important piece of computer history, and there's really only one left. So let's see if we can find more of them out there if they exist. Now, we saw earlier what a more old school variety of ransomware note looks like. When we talk ransomware, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what they look like. They come in, the ransomware notes or splash screens come in all shapes and sizes. Some are matrix-like, some have scary imagery, some have pictures of presidents on it. They might have Jigsaw or the anonymous posters and things like that. And they'll inspire anxiety and fear in different ways in how they work. They'll give you different instructions on how to pay or to get customer support. But they're all different sorts. There's, I want to say over 50 to 70 ransomware families that are out there running around, and they're really getting worse every single month. Now, I'm going to go into these little by little, but I want to describe for you, if you guys aren't already aware, that ransomware has impacted just about every major industry out there with some pretty nasty side effects. You've hit the medical industry, you've hit police departments, everyday people, even security companies. So we're going to go through a couple of stories here to kind of give ourselves an idea of the escalation of ransomware that's out there and the damage it causes. And this is really important because ransomware seems, it's not a terribly sexy attack, it's not terribly sophisticated, but what it is, it's simple, it's effective, and it's very lucrative. And so that's why the bad guys go after it. So the first example I want to run through is how it impacts IoT devices, in this case, an LG Smart TV. And what this Smart TV is, it's nothing more than a computer that displays to a screen, and it's running an Android operating system. So in this particular case, a technologist really got their Smart TV infected by a piece of ransomware, and it effectively broke the TV. The TV was asking to get paid and to unlock the TV. So fortunately, there's not really much data on the TV, but the TV is broken. So they try to call the manufacturer, try to get the reset codes. There's a large story behind this, and it was very difficult for them to reset the TV. They finally did. But this kind of paints to a world as we go more and more towards Internet of Things devices, where every refrigerator, toaster, computer, light bulb is going to be connected to the internet. And a lot of them are going to be running the same desktop operating systems or common operating systems like a Linux or something like that, or an Android operating system. And we're going to have to deal with malware on everyday household devices that just happen to be connected to the internet. This is the one, and this is half embarrassing and half funny. But in this particular case, this particular person got infected with ransomware, and the ransom took control over their camera and, shall we say, recorded them in intimate moments. And the extortion was that the person would have to pay the hackers $10,000 or some amount, it was $10,000 in this case, or they were going to post all their data, all their embarrassing data to the internet to embarrass them for life. And this was a young college student, if I remember correctly, and it's not somebody that you might expect to have $10,000. But so in one sense, do they pay the $10,000 or do they risk having their lives ruined? But this kind of shows the real world, the people impact of ransomware, of how this could affect everyday people, moms, dads, our friends, our family, that all of a sudden get thrust into this world because they caught a virus. Going up a little bit in terms of business impact, we had this a case where we had a hotel in Europe. This hotel had their key card systems, and we're used to going to hotels. We get key cards, and we do a swipe on a key card on the door, and the door opens, the electronic locks. And that electronic lock system was supplied by a vendor. In this particular case, ransomware got onto the key card system and was preventing guests from leaving their rooms. Preventing them from getting into their room. So they can open the door and let themselves out, but the key cards weren't working on the way in. It was really disrupting all the guests. And they had to pay the ransomware to unlock the key card system so the hotel operations would continue to run. So after the third attempt, because the key card system was supplied by a third-party vendor, now, after the third time, this hotel finally threw up their hands and said, we're getting away from all this electronic stuff here, and we're going back to physical key. So they actually had to pay the ransom twice to get the hotel operations running, but now they're going to rip and replace now. So it kind of tells you how impactful these things are on normal everyday businesses like a hotel. The next case here is one from last year. You guys might be familiar with this. This had to do with ransomware that hit the San Francisco Muni system that runs all the trains and the buses in the city. It didn't hit the trains and the buses per se. What it did hit was the ticketing systems. So reportedly, thousands of machines in the San Francisco municipal area and their ticketing system got ransomware. And unless they paid the ransom, they couldn't collect fees to ride the trains and the buses. So what San Francisco did, they were fortunate, they were able to recover their systems rather quickly because this happened over a weekend. So what the city did, fortunately for them, they didn't have to pay the ransom. So what the city did is they just let all the riders over the weekend ride for free, which cost them a few $100,000 in would-be ticket sales, but to allow the system to keep running. But there was lots of interesting pictures around where you try to go up to get your ticket or for the bus or see screens, and there would be a ransom note on the screen. So it was rather disruptive for the transportation industry. Ransomware directly impacted the transportation industry and cost the San Francisco Muni system a few $100,000 for the effort. The next one I want to go over is a story that there wasn't a lot of media pickup. I wasn't sure exactly why, but what they found out in this particular case is that in Washington, D.C., during the during the inauguration, I should say, a lot of the surveillance cameras were closed-circuit TV cameras, but they were internet connected. Somehow, some way, ransomware infected and killed 70% of the closed-circuit TV cameras during the inauguration, and they lost visibility. And for some reason, and that was 8 days before, and some reason no one really noticed until after the inauguration. So again, this now impacts potential national security or security of our country and our presidency, especially during the inauguration. So it's getting a little severe here. There's also a couple of cases where ransomware disrupted emergency services. In this case, it was the 911 system. So in this case, the 911 system got ransomware. It disrupted the automation portion of it, and they had to actually respond manually. So it slowed down emergency responses to emergency calls, and that, by extension, can put lives at risk. Fortunately, I don't think anything like that happened here, but the fact that ransomware could impact 911 is something to be a little concerned about. And one that's similar but not identical is when ransomware impacted a small town police department. And like many police departments, if you separate the fact that they're a police department, they're really just small businesses with small IT shops. In this case, like many police departments, they keep all their investigations data on computers. It's no longer just file folders in an office box or something like that. There's ongoing cases with files on the computers where they have evidence and case data and all those sorts of things. So in this case, the ransomware encrypted years worth of case data, both historical and active, and through, I can only describe as a comedy of errors, that in this particular case, they decided not to pay the ransom because they thought they had backups. The backups apparently either didn't work or didn't have the right backups, and when they overwrote it with the backups they thought they had, they blew away the encrypted data. And in that particular case, they figured out later that they'd have to pay the ransom, but in that case, all their encrypted data and their data was gone. And I think what we're going to find here is some criminals or would-be criminals are going to walk because all the data on the investigation is now vanished. So again, now we're talking about impacting their criminal justice system because of ransomware. Again, we can't have these things. And the last one I want to talk about here is the one that gets the most play, and rightly so, is ransomware as it impacts the medical care industry. And this example was from the National Health Trust, the NHS in Europe. This was before WannaCry. This was before Petya. It was something else. And this particular ransomware outbreak, it impacted a number of medical facilities. And in the course of 48 hours, the system was shut down, and they had to cancel and reschedule 2,800 patient appointments. So now we're using ransomware to disrupting medical care. Collectively, we can't have things like this. We're going to have to get the ransomware problem under control, and for that, we're going to have preventative measures and also how to react in the event that we get infected. So that's really what we're all here to discuss. So I've given you some industry anecdotes on things that have actually happened, real-world stories, but that's far cry from actual data. So I'm going to give you a couple of data factoids so we can see what this ransomware problem is made up of. So I'm going to give you 3 different companies. Here's from IBM Securities X-Force. They said 70% of enterprises, ransomware victims have paid up. So imagine that. 70% of those getting infected with ransomware find themselves in a position where they have to pay. that indicates that the infections were very broad and they had to get the keys quickly to unlock themselves, or the systems did not have proper backups. So that's kind of a sobering reminder. 20% of the organizations had to pay ransoms that are over 40 grand. What we can see collectively is that ransomware demands, the amounts paid, are going up. They used to be only a few $100s, then it became a few $1,000s. Now we're in the tens of thousands, and in 2 cases, 7 figures. Let me just go on to the next stat here. These are 2 stats from SentinelOne that we did based on survey last year. Over the last 12 months, 50% of organizations have responded to a ransomware campaign of those that we surveyed. So ransomware is hitting just about everybody out there. And if you haven't experienced ransomware or seen an outbreak yet, count yourself lucky, because everybody seems to be having to deal with this problem now. And then those organizations that suffered a ransomware attack in the last 12 months, 85% stated that they were hit with 3 or more attacks. So usually you don't get hit with just one. You actually get hit with multiple. So if you're exposed to these things, you're going to get hit with them a lot. Moving on. Let's go one or two more from Kaspersky. So Kaspersky also similarly was noticing a large uptick in the number of infections that they're out there that they were seeing. They saw a 3-fold increase from January to September of last year, and then 1 in 5 businesses worldwide, according to their data, were victims of ransomware. And then finally, where is this ransomware coming from? And there's different reports say different things. I like the Kaspersky report. They did their analysis, and I enjoy it. 75% of the ransomware that they're analyzing comes from 75% of the ransomware they saw in 2016 comes from the Russian-speaking cyber criminal underground. So this seems to be, when you talk cybercrime out of that region of the world, Eastern Europe, it seems like ransomware is their new go-to business model, and this is what's causing all the impact. So now that we've learned a lot about ransomware, I was starting to ask on Twitter, where are we going to see the extortion amounts go? And as I mentioned earlier, I was likening it to bug bounties for vulnerabilities, but I was really interested in seeing, getting some ideas from the crowd when we're going to see 7-figure ransoms paid. And I said this earlier in the year, January or so of 2017. A friend and colleague of mine, Richard Baitlick, responded briefly, and he said he was already aware of a 7-figure ransom being paid. He couldn't really tell me much specifics about the victim, but what he did say was a law firm, and the law firm had all their data and all their clients' data encrypted, and effectively they're out of business. So they couldn't respond to legal actions, they couldn't respond to deals, and they had active deals in process. Imagine all legal paperwork for all their clients was encrypted. Unless they paid, they're out of business, and the backups weren't there. So they decided to pay to keep themselves in business, and that's what they did. There was a second case more recently that had to do with I forget where the ISP was, but it was a 7-figure ransom paid, where all their customer data that was on their hosting platform was encrypted, and it wasn't backed up properly. Until they paid, they would have been out of business. Not only that, all their customers would have been out of business. So they paid a 7-figure ransom to get the data unlocked. So this is what was going on out there. These are the anomalies, and we hope they stay anomalies, but who knows, maybe this is going to become the norm as we move further into 2017 and 2018. So collectively, what can we learn about all the things that all the information that we've brought in thus far? One is, clearly not all critical systems are backed up. That needs to change. Whatever antivirus software all these systems, companies, and organizations are running sucks, which is a direct way of saying just doesn't work. And third, the infection rates are rising in ransomware, meaning the problem is certainly not stable. It's not going down. It's going up fast. Ransom demands are going up. Here's one interesting one that's not exactly clear, not to say clear, easy to spot in all the data, is that CFOs or their law firms are actually starting to learn how to transact in Bitcoin, if nothing else, but to learn how to pay ransoms, which is a pretty sad world, but it is what they're doing. And in fact, I've seen a lot of companies ask their law firms to hold Bitcoins as a retainer in the event that they get ransomware and they don't have another option. So what they didn't want is to get their wallets encrypted or access to, so they're having their law firm store the Bitcoins on their behalf. And then the last two, innovation in business models we're seeing. on how ransomware goes broad but also targets. And then finally, cyber insurance is getting on the act and helping to compensate victims of ransomware to help them either pay the ransom or respond to an incident so the business is less disruptive and the incident is less costly. So now we've learned a lot about ransomware. Let's go into the world of kidnapping and ransom, or KNR for short, which is, again, high-seas piracy, kidnapping, extortion, the real-world, non-technical, non-digital stuff, which is reportedly a $500 million U.S. market. Now, when I first started looking at this, I was looking at it going, okay, it's a sentient attacker that's going to take something from us, encrypt it, and then they're the only ones we can get it back from. So again, it was very similar to KNR. So I wanted to learn about KNR, so I start with watching a whole bunch of Hollywood movies, and start with these sets here, and a lot of them are obviously dramatic for Hollywood, but stunningly enough, when I was reading the real world accounts and then watching the movies side by side, they're kind of true to life, actually. It's like it's actually more realistic than you might automatically assume since it's coming from Hollywood. One of the stories, the real world stories in history, one of my favorites that I came across was one by Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar, he's 25 years old. He gets kidnapped by Sicilian pirates, and the pirates then asked for 20 talents of silver or they were going to kill him. So pay the 20 talents of silver, which is a couple of $100,000 in converted currency today. And when Caesar saw the ransom demand that they were asking, he laughed at them. That's just the kind of person that he is. He's held for ransom, he's held hostage, and he laughs at his hostage takers because they're not asking for enough. He demanded that they ask for 50 talents of silver, because I guess that maybe helps them in some way, and because 20,000 talents of silver wasn't enough. So during his capture, he would then order the captors around. He would ask them to be quiet during his nap times or listen to his poetry and things like that, and for whatever reason, they would comply. Eventually, the 50 talents of silver was paid. He was released, and the way he got back at them was he sent his navy to go capture the Sicilian pirates, and they were all subsequently crucified. Now, that story, while pretty grisly tale, is similar to high-seas piracy that we'll see in a minute. So it's another reason why I bring it up. Another case of kidnapping and ransom that's worth looking at is one where a Taiwanese billionaire was kidnapped and held for ransom. But what made this one different is that they were not asking for briefcases of cash that you put into a trash can or something like that. The ransom was paid in bitcoins. 1.68 million was paid in bitcoins to release this particular Taiwanese billionaire. So this story had a reasonably happy ending. He was released, and Taiwan decided to ban bitcoins. So now you're seeing a little bit of kidnapping and ransom get digital with respect to how you get paid, because cash is a little bit more difficult to transact it. Finally, we're going to spend a few minutes here looking at high-seas piracy, because as a business model, as an ongoing business model, this is the one where I saw a lot of parallels. So let's start here, and these are some stories. I first saw it on Planet Money and NPR. There's another very long and very in-depth series on Wired. So I'll cover some of the basics in these things. So one of the quotes here is that if you're a Somali fisherman, if you fish for your profession in Somalia, you'll notice that many of them are trading their nets for guns because it's far more profitable. Robbery like high-seas piracy is obviously going to be far more profitable than anything that they might pick up out of the sea from normal fishing. So here's how it works. If you are an ordinary Somali, you might make $600 a year on average. But if you were to participate in high-seas piracy, a successful endeavor, you might make $10,000, or 17 times that your annual earning. Now, from those of us in the West, or places that aren't from Somalia, we're going like, you're going to risk your life for $10,000. It doesn't seem very smart. But if you look at it from their perspective, being in Somalia, it's already death-defying to live there. And the added risk of being a pirate isn't that much different than being a fisherman. So a lot of them just take the gamble, even though you may or may not succeed in your endeavor. But so this is what they do. So on the bottom here, you'll see a whole bunch of formulas in the financial analysis that the kidnapping and ransom insurance industries do. So one of the things that we know from statistics, the data, is that fewer than 1 in 3 ship or cargo hijackings attempted are successful. So only 1 in 3 are successful. What we also know is that there's only a 15-minute window between when the attack is launched. So the pirates have to get on the ship within 15 minutes. Otherwise, the helicopter gunships from the nearby navies will be deployed and blow them out of the water. And this is the race. So only 1 in 3 attempts are successful, and there's a 15-minute window. And given these variables, we can start outlining what the risk is, risk of hijacking and risk of loss at the same time. So this is the data that we need. Now, I'm going to go through the kidnapping and ransom or high seas piracy business model from how the bad guys look at it. I'm not going to make these up. This is actual investment endeavor is the way they look at it. This is a business to them. So to set up a high seas piracy operation takes between $50,000 and $250,000 in seed capital. You need a crew of a dozen or 2 men. You need equipment, and these equipment could be speedboats, a larger ship to launch the boats to extend their range. You need a caterer, because pirates got to eat. You need ladders, ropes. You need intelligence to know where the boats and the ships are, the ones that have the valuable cargo. Of course, you're going to need weapons and communications equipment. Now, the intelligence goes to select the targets by cargo, their owner, or ports of origin. Different ships from different regions have different cargoes are worth different amounts of money. So the pirates want to go after the easy targets that are worth a lot of money. And then finally, you expect to collect money, and you're going to need a trustworthy, quote-unquote, financial system for money laundering. In this case, the go-to network is the Islamic banking network. And so collectively, this is the mission of parameters. This is what needs to happen to make a successful high seas piracy operation. Next, let's talk about those that are behind this. You have the tribal elders who liaison with the outside world, the Somali tribal elders, because it's a tribal culture. You have the financiers. They come up with the money to finance the operation. They usually come from local businessmen or Islamic militant groups. You have the commander who heads the entire operation. They marshal the resources, they get all the equipment, they recruit the crews, they organize everything. You need a security squad to protect the commander and to ferry supplies and protect the equipment. You need the mothership crew attack squad, the pirates that actually go on the little skiffs that jump onto the boat. And then you need English-speaking negotiators, because the average Somali fisherman, the average pirate doesn't know English. So when you negotiate, you're going to want to speak in English. So they have land-based professional negotiators that, on the bad guy side, to negotiate for the release or the release of the cargo for the right sum. Now, I walk you through all these things because ransomware is no different. It is an investment opportunity. You can invest in the ransomware campaign, and it's professionalized behind the scenes because you have exploit writers, you have the negotiators, you have the malware creators, and all those sorts of things. So just like this business model gets separated by persona, same thing in the malware and the ransomware world. Now, during negotiations for high seas piracy, the negotiation may take days, weeks, or months, and sometimes, very sadly, years. The negotiations are usually handled on the victim side by a professional KRR consultant who are probably ex-military or ex-law enforcement, because a lot of times you don't want the victim negotiating with some English-speaking bad guy, because they're going to be completely ill-equipped and inexperienced to handle the situation. They're going to be stressed, so you want somebody professional. The final one here in the negotiation process is you want no supernormal profits. You don't want, in the market, you don't want an over-anxious victim paying too much, because it actually encourages way more piracy later on and demands for a higher price later. So you want to control the prices as in the market. And I'll talk more about this later. Now, how do pirates, high seas pirates, which operate in the Middle East, or maybe in South America in the oil industry, how do they get the money? Well, when they're doing high seas piracy and you're in the middle of the Indian Ocean or something like that, what they normally do is they put money in these large buoys, 100 notes. And so it was interesting here, this quote: $1 million in $100 bills weighs about 29 pounds. It's placed into a container like an inflatable ball, and it's dropped out of an airplane using a parachute guided by GPS. So they drop millions of dollars into the ocean, they track it, and then the pirates run out there, grab it, they count it, and if everything goes well, then they release the cargo and the hostages. Now, once the pirates get their money, what happens next? First, they have to reimburse their suppliers for all the equipment because they fronted all that stuff. The financiers take their cut, which could be anywhere from 30 to 70% of the ransom. The elders, the tribal elders that are on shore, they will get 5 to 15% of the ransom. It's their tribute, so to speak. And the crew divides up the rest of the sum. That's how you get to the $10,000 or so, but the numbers will vary. Then the crew has to figure out a way to get their cash safely to shore without getting arrested, without getting robbed by other pirates, and so on and so forth. So a lot of times they'll take the victim's vessel and ask them for a ride to drop them off at a safe port or harbor. So that's why it gets a little risky. Now, when you want to guard yourself against high seas piracy, what are the recommendations? What has been done in the past? Because maybe I looked at these, is that if we could see the strategy that they've taken to curtail high seas piracy, we might be able to apply the same philosophies to ransomware. In this case, you need armed private security guards on board the ships. So in case, when the skiffs come close or the pirates come close, they'll start shooting at the skiffs. The ships have hardened vessels and able to take evasive action. So they're going to have water cannons, tall fences, and they'll take serpentine motions to cause wakes that make the skiffs flip over because they're light and fast moving. They don't draw a lot of water. There's also governmental policy changes in Somalia so that high seas piracy is no longer a protected class of business or a conveniently ignored one. That's no longer the case. They took preemptive action by the combined navies in the region. That's short or polite for military gunships, Navy gunships, which are helicopters, went to the pirates' hideout, as it were, and blew up all their equipment. Collectively, during that time where I got these numbers, it reduced high seas piracy by 80%. Doing all these protective actions. And then finally, because I thought it was pretty humorous, Britney Spears actually plays a part in deterrence for high seas piracy, and I'll get to that in a second. So how does Britney Spears fit into all this? Well, since a lot of these pirates from that region are from Islamic origin, they find Western music to be entirely offensive. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Britney Spears and high seas piracy, you'll find some pretty humorous videos where they're blasting very loud Britney Spears music in the direction of the skiffs, and while they shoot at them, and after you blare this music for long enough, they turn around and go away. And they've tried with Eminem and Britney Spears and those sorts of things, but this tactic apparently works. They're blasting loud music at that they don't like at the perpetrators, at the pirates, and then they'll turn around. So I thought that was worth sharing. I don't know how we apply this to ransomware. Maybe somebody's more creative than me. So far, we've learned a lot about ransomware. We've learned a lot about kidnapping and ransom. We're going to spend the last few moments now talking about kidnapping and ransom insurance and their business model for covering these losses. K&R Insurance dates back to 1932 when the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping happened, but it really didn't really become more than a boutique token insurance product until the late 70s, where there was lots of oil exploration in South America. And then the market expanded to cover shipping, oil shipments and different things like that out of the Middle Eastern region. So K&R Insurance as a class is what you might expect. K&R Insurance covers the losses in having to deal with and respond to kidnapping and ransom. So, a lot of times it's out of Mexico, Venezuela, but it's also in Nigeria and lots of other places. It's a well-known class of insurance. So the insurance business is really just a gamble at the end of the day. People guide us at other things, but it's really just a gamble. I'm going to read this one verbatim here because this one spoke to me. The insurance business is a gamble. Insurers know that some ships will be hijacked, forcing companies to dispense multi-million-dollar settlements, which they'll then reimburse. However, they know the chance of this happening is minuscule by the calculations of their industry, which by the calculations of their industry makes it worth issuing policies. So they have the data. They know how often hijackings happen. They know what the costs are and everything about it. So they're able to offer insurance and make a profit on it. And in doing so, they'll be able to tell their clients what things they can do to most minimize the risk. This is very helpful. And they're actually able to respond in the event of a hostage situation with their resources. So they know who to call when a hijacking has occurred and help their client in a very difficult time. Again, ransomware or cyber insurance won't be much different in this way. So who are the K&R insurance carriers? It's AIG, Travelers, Hiscox is a small boutique, but it's the largest insurance companies, which also just happen to be the same insurers that sell us cyber insurance. So they're probably taking their models, and I've had conversation with these guys, they're taking their kidnapping and ransom economic models, and they're applying it to cyber insurance to price the risk. That's why we're seeing lots of new cyber insurance products, because you're dealing with the sentient attacker. And that's where we're going to get into the similarities and differences now between ransomware and K&R. Before we get there, K&R insurance will cover the ransom amount, to get your loved ones back, your cargo back, transportation costs, legal liability, medical expenses, lost wages, all sorts of things. And the last one here, which just sounds kind of weird, it's called extortionist bounty. If the client wants to go after, or the insurer wants to go after the bad guys, the pirates in this case, who hijacked the vessel and got the money because maybe it was a lot, this will pay for the bounty and the investigation to go after them. It's really what it is, to bring them to justice or something worse. Now, when I said no supernormal profits, this is where we're going to cover this. So let me read this one here, because it's going to mirror in cyber insurance. All kidnapping insurance is either written or reinsured at Lloyd's of London. Within the Lloyd's of London market, there are about 20 firms or syndicates competing for the business. So Lloyd's of London provides the K&R insurance, and many different insurance companies can all sell that product. They all must play by Lloyd's of London's rules for how much to pay under what circumstances. Now, someone else can offer K&R insurance, but they're not going to have the data that Lloyd's have or one of their syndicates have, so they're at a natural disadvantage when it comes to the economics. This is how they constrain and control the ransomware payouts to market norms. Now, if we translate this to cyber insurance, 60 to 70% of all cyber insurance rolls up underneath Lloyd's. So that's how we know it's the same models are applying between K&R insurance and cyber insurance. The same models will happen because it's all the same players. Now, if you wanted to buy K&R insurance, the prices will vary depending on who you are, what type of coverage. It might cost you $500 a year for a $1 million policy, or $50,000 for a $25 million policy. Policy confidentiality is really important. You're not allowed to tell anybody that you have K&R insurance, because if the kidnappers know that, they're more likely to target you because they know you can pay, or at least you're going to get reimbursed. We're going to see more and more of this for cyber insurance, where the insurer is not going to want anybody to know who they've covered for how much. I haven't seen that much yet, but it will come. Ransomware is reimbursed and not paid. Ransoms are reimbursed and not paid directly. So the company or the victim still has to pay directly, and they'll get reimbursed by their insurance company. And they get to go through customer training, how to avoid getting taken hostage, and what do you do in the event of a hostage takeover. Like in the ships for high seas piracy, the crews are trained that if the pirates get on board, drop your weapons, do not fight, do not escalate. There's no need for loss of life, because no one wants that. And the pirates know that as well, which is why we see much less violence once the ship is taken over, because it just makes dealings, the whole business becomes difficult when there's violence and loss of life. So now collectively, after we've gone through all this and I've inundated you with information, what does the kidnapping and ransom economy teach us about ransomware, the real point of why we're all here? So let's go through the similarities first. So between K&R and ransomware, we have a sentient adversary When you're the victim that you know it, which is not the case in traditional ransomware, time is always on the adversary's side. Adversaries will leverage fear and anxiety. That's why all those splash screens are meant to be clear in what they want, but also very scary to cause you urgency. It's a bilateral monopoly in economic terms, meaning there's only one person you can get your data from or your loved ones from, and there's only one person who will pay for it. So this means, a deal between the two has to be made, and economically both are encouraged to do so. The market value of the asset is subjective. The market value of the cargo or the hostages, or in this case the data, is all very subjective, and so they'll go around market norms. This goes back to the no supernormal profits. Victims are targeted, usually in the case of kidnapping and ransom. In the case of the large ransomware payouts, it's very targeted, but there is a large amount that's indiscriminate, that's mass blast, spray and pray. If adversaries break an agreement, they'll ruin the business for everybody. So I hear this a lot, that what guarantees that you have that if you pay, you'll get the key to your data back? There really isn't any. But in the event of, let's say, high seas piracy, most of the time the transaction is made with both sides, agreeing to the terms and coming through on it, because this is not a one and done for them. They're not going to take their one-time bounty and not do this again. This is an ongoing business. So if they don't give up your loved ones or your cargo after you've paid, no one's going to pay again, and that ruins the business, and that ruins their business. So like we see in ransomware, it's not always that the key will open it, but the vast majority of time it does. This isn't said to encourage you to pay, only a statement of fact as I see how it actually works out there in the wild as far as incentives go. What are the differences? Ransomware requires, as an operational model, ransomware requires far less upfront costs. In the case of, kidnapping and ransom or high seas piracy, it takes you somewhere between $50,000 and $250,000 to get started. Ransomware, it's a few $100s, a few $1,000s, and not much else. Ransomware is far less risky to the adversaries. You don't need to carry a gun. No one's going to be shooting at you, especially military gunships, so it's safer than high seas piracy. The hostage, in ransomware, the hostage or the data is not a witness, so you don't have to worry about it pointing out who you are or taking care of it or anything like that. Ransomware scales. In the case of high seas piracy, if you're one of the crew, you can only do one campaign at a time. In ransomware, you can hit a whole bunch of companies all at once, so it scales much better, which kind of explains why the numbers inflated so fast in ransomware. In ransomware, the negotiation process is way faster. It's almost immediate if you choose to pay like the $500 ones. It's just you automatically get the key. But in the case of the targeted ones where they're trying to get 5, 6, or 7 figures from you, it still only takes 1 to 3 days normally. And then ransomware is far easier to pay logistically. There's no dropping buoys full of money into the ocean. You pay Bitcoin and the transaction happens and that's it. So so there's lots of similarities between KNR and ransomware we can use to just, predict the future. But also the differences give a lot of leverage to ransomware as an economic business model that works. So what are the trends that we can expect in ransomware? And, this is a little bit like predicting the present, from when I first started giving this presentation. Ransomware campaigns are increasingly being professionalized and well-funded. You'll actually see the back office model. The exploits come from here. The ransomware comes from this one. The support is handled by these guys. Those who email it out and distribute it are separate. It's all very professionalized. This is a professionalized cybercrime business. We're going to see the emergence of a professional ransomware negotiator, very similar to the Hollywood movies. You're going to call your ransomware negotiator if the campaign is targeted, if they have all your data and they're talking with you, you're going to want to bring in somebody from your insurer that your insurance points to or your incident responders to handle the negotiation. The cyber insurers will start to require, like I mentioned before, their clients to keep their ransomware policies or their cyber insurance policies secret. And then finally, the adversaries will, and this is very clear, adversaries will increasingly target backup systems, and that's in their best interest because it will increase the likelihood of the victim paying. So that's why I say you need not only backups, but immutable backups, and we'll get to that in a second, because if you're in the business of selling data back to the victims, you don't want them to be able to recover, so you're going to go after their backups, which means on their file shares or wherever you can find it. So let's give some helpful guidance, because we've learned a lot so far. So what can I share with you? And you might know a lot of these things, but let's go through them anyway on the basic things that will help you defeat ransomware before, during, and after. One is there is no substitute for backups. You have to have backups, and you're going to want to test your backups because recovery sometimes fails. Secondly, you want immutable backups, the ones that are not always connected to the internet, because like I said, the bad guys will go after them. And please, if you have to pay the ransom, make sure you do not destroy the encrypted data. Do not destroy the encrypted data before you fully recovered. In the event that your backups don't work, you're going to need the encrypted data if you have the last option of paying to decrypt. If you blow away the decrypted data on the assumption that your backups work, you're going to find yourself in a very similar position as that police station that lost years worth of their data. There's also the notion of fast recovery via virtualization. I've visited a number of large enterprises that have mostly a virtualized environment, and if there's an infection that took place, they'll just kill the instance and they'll reload it, and they're off and running again from a known good state. That is one way to do it operationally if your IT environment has that set up. Third, and I think everybody should do this, if you're running Office, across the enterprise or on your home machine, disable Office macros unless you really, really need them. Now, the latest version of Office gives you a bit more fine-grained controls over what apps or what the macros can do, but we're seeing a significant amount of ransomware leveraging macros because it's much, much harder to see, detect, or at least for the antivirus vendors to see and detect malware of this kind. It comes right to your inbox. You double-click on it. If you scan the file, there's no malware there, but once you click on it, the macro runs, downloads the ransomware, and bang, your machine's encrypted, because ransomware does not require root. You just got to encrypt all the files, which you don't need root to do. We're going to need law enforcement to continue to investigate and arrest ransomware groups to the extent that they can, depending on where in the world that they are. We're going to see the formation of insurance syndicates, that are backed by Lloyd's. Again, a little bit of predicting the present here. This is already happening. And then we're going to start to get more and more guidance from our cyber insurers, because they're going to have a lot of actuarial data. When companies make claims, insurance claims on a cyber breach, the insurers are start collecting the data and figuring out what security controls work best. And if you want to continue on with them, or at least not want your insurance premiums to spike, they're going to have really good data on what to use, when to use, how to configure things. And so that's a little bit more down the road, but we're going to see lots more guidance and stringent guidance from our cyber insurers than we have so far. The last slide here I want to share with you here, because it kind of tells a lot about the market. So I want to read this one here. It's probably easier if I just read it. In 2010, 148 million in ransoms were paid to pirates, the real-world KNR ransoms, 148 million. On the other hand, $1.85 billion were spent on insurances to cover piracy. So all the things that we do to ensure or to prevent piracy was 10 times larger than the ransom amounts that we paid out to them. 10 times larger. And we are likely to see some sort of ratio similar to malware and ransomware when the insurance comes to play. So we're going to be spending 10 times more preventing ransomware or preventing malware than what we pay out in ransoms. So there is a good opportunity here this is one of the reasons why I jumped into this space, because a very large problem, it was getting worse, it's where I can make an impact, and there was lots of opportunity to get involved to stop these things. The economics just seem to make sense. So that's a big reason why I'm in the market. It's where I can make an impact. And I found my way to SentinelOne because they had one of the very few products, next-gen anti-malware products that worked and really stopped this problem. And they asked, when they came on board, it was design a warranty for them to put their money where our mouth is. And I can tell you about that in a moment, but let's see where we're at here as far as time goes. I can talk more about that later, but I wanted to give Neil Lucy time to do a demo of the product to show you how the SentinelOne product prevents ransomware. So let me shift the ball over there. Give me one moment, please. Let's see here. I'm shifting over to you, Neil. 1 second.
Great.
There you go.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. I'll give it a couple of seconds. So in the interest of time, I'll get right to it. I'm Neil Lucy. I'm a Senior Solution Architect with SentinelOne, and I'll show you an example of ransomware through the lens of our product. Just a quick background, SentinelOne is an endpoint platform. It uses a single autonomous agent that provides prevention, detection, and automated response. It scans, or it looks at files at 3 layers of protection, meaning we look at things on pre-execution, meaning when they're written to disk or accessed. We have a behavioral-based engine, which performs real-time behavioral analysis on content and is able to stop things at runtime. And we do post-execution, which is around forensics, remediation, and mitigation. And what you're looking at is our dashboard. We operate on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And as far as policies, basically we have 2 settings: detect, which is alert only, or protect, which is kill malicious processes and automatically quarantine. We can set that for threats or suspicious. Threats being things that we have high confidence for, suspicious being things that we have lower confidence for. To quickly show you guys an example of a piece of ransomware that we caught and quarantined in real time, this is CryptoLocker. As you can see, I open up the alert, it was killed, it was quarantined. Essentially, we caught this at runtime. In typical ransomware fashion, when this ran, it made a call out to an IP address over port 443. That was to receive essentially a payload. And you can look at what CryptoLocker did, and I'll get a little more into this in the next example. But if you look, this is a graphical representation of what ransomware does. And if I highlight CryptoLocker here, you can essentially see in the events, this was a memory-based attack, meaning it was an attack that was designed not to write to disk, a fileless attack. What this sample did when it executed was it allocated memory on the endpoint. It reached out to a C2 server, which then sent the malicious payload to run in that memory space. So this is a nasty way of getting ransomware to essentially run on an endpoint without touching the disk, which can cause traditional antivirus or other security platforms to miss it. Now, to show you an example of a ransomware that I will let run and complete, I'm going to use a policy that's in detect, which is alert, alert, essentially, and I'm going to jump onto my Windows 7 VM here. Now, this is a Windows 7 machine running our endpoint agent. I'm going to take this sample. You can see a little alert. That's our static analysis engine telling me that this is something that's suspicious. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. Now, this is TeslaCrypt that I'm running. This is usually delivered via macro or via web exploit, but if you're a user right now, you're looking at your screen and you're wondering why those 2 things just popped up on the desktop to restore files. And you're thinking, all right, maybe that's not such a big deal, right? I'll just go about my business. And you're walking. And then all of a sudden your files get encrypted and you can see, well, why are my files all of a sudden have ABC after them? That's probably not such a good thing. Maybe I should consider calling help desk. You know, and then we'll just we'll wait for the last part of this attack to come to fruition, which would be, there it is, the splash screen, right? What happened to your files? Now this is telling me, we're going to tell you what happened to your files, and now you're sitting as a user, you're like, all right, I better do something. I better call help desk because now your heart's racing and you're thinking you did something wrong. So our endpoint agent, even though it was in alert only mode, we send all the forensics data back about this attack. So if I open up this Tesla EXE in our platform, I could see under network connections that this thing was reaching out to multiple C2 servers. It was out there beaconing, right? I let this run. And in the storyline, you know, this is typically what ransomware does, right? Tesla, what does Tesla do? Well, Tesla spawns this secondary executable, which then accesses volume shadow copy, right? This is typical ransomware behavior. And what you're looking at is our platform taking all this information and creating a graphical representation of what a ransomware attack does. While Tesla's bringing down that information, it's also running a command shell and deleting itself. If you notice when I double-clicked on it, it vanished from the screen, right? That's a method of hiding. So our endpoint platform is going to give you a breakdown of what the attack did, but it's also going to give you the option to take action. These are actionable, meaning I can initiate something called a rollback. And I'll do that right from the dashboard. And what rollback does is it tells that endpoint agent to essentially undo the changes and restore the machine to a known good state. So if I click on rollback, I'm going to send that command to my endpoint agent, which is then going to receive the command, and it's going to essentially undo the changes the ransomware made. It's going to undo the files that it dropped. and then it's going to restore that information that was encrypted. So essentially what your user gets now is, it's a sigh of relief, right? Because now your organization is saved a lot of time and a lot of money because you have a platform that can not only identify and prevent ransomware in real time, but also has the capability of getting machines that are compromised back to a known good state, right? That last level of insurance. And you combine this capability, and that's why, as Jeremiah mentioned, we're able to offer a ransomware warranty to our customers. And now I'll pass it back to, I guess, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Are you on mute?
Yep, still on mute, talking to the screen. I'm just going to go through and see if there's any questions that popped up. I'm going to unmute Joe so he can actually close us out.
Yeah, no, great stuff. While we're waiting for any questions, really cool stuff, guys. And if anybody has that old floppy disk with that ransomware, the original ransomware virus, yeah, please reach out. That'd be cool stuff. Appreciate it, guys. Again, just a friendly reminder. Keep coming to our web series this week with details on how to win an Amazon $100 gift card. We'll be giving those, having a random drawing towards the end and passing out a few of those. Also, once again, I do want to mention Wednesday, we have a very special guest, Charles Dindell of the Charles Tendell Show podcast. He'll be hosting our web series on Wednesday.